The USMC captain leaned back in the briefing room, smirking at the chatter around him. He made a careless joke about a new female pilot's call sign, not realizing the room had grown quiet. He thought the laughter that followed would lighten the tension. But instead, the room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone paused mid-motion, looking at him and at each other, as if waiting for something to happen. The woman in question remained calm, her eyes fixed on a map on the table, but there was a sharp edge. In the way she held herself, he chuckled nervously, brushing a hand over the back of his neck, and glanced around, trying to gauge the mood. But the glances he received were not what he expected. The air seemed to thicken with the unspoken, and he realized he had overstepped something important. He tried to make another joke, but it caught in his throat from the corner of the room. A shadow moved just slightly enough to be noticed, but not enough to be identified. His colleagues exchanged quiet glances, but said nothing. The captain felt a chill creep up his spine. He had commanded troops in harsh environments, faced fire and storms, but there was a weight in that room heavier than anything outside. The presence of someone who had earned the respect of the unit without raising their voice was palpable, and it reminded him that words could carry far more danger than bullets. He swallowed hard and tried to focus on the briefing papers in front of him, but the map seemed to blur as his mind raced. The woman with the new call sign leaned forward, her fingers tracing invisible lines on the table as if she could draw meaning from the silence alone. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting his, and he felt a jolt of awareness that this was not a moment for humor. The captain had seen discipline before in rookies and seasoned men, but the calm contained in her posture was different. It carried history and the hint of a story. He could not begin to imagine. A faint metallic scrape echoed from the back of the room, and he turned sharply to locate the source, but saw only the quiet figure in the corner. The air seemed charged with expectation. His heart rate quickened as he realized that this was no ordinary presence. This was someone who had earned the right to command attention without words, who could make an entire room hold still with a single glance. Captain tried to speak again, but the words sounded hollow in his ears. He noticed that even the others who had laughed with him earlier were now watching silently, waiting to see how he would respond. The weight of the room pressed down on him, the walls narrowing as if closing in. He remembered all the times he had relied on rank and bravado to carry him through tense situations. But here, none of that seemed to matter. He took a deep breath and tried to shake off the unease, but it clung stubbornly to his skin. His gaze flicked back to the map, trying to ground himself in something familiar, but his mind was distracted by the silent scrutiny. The woman raised a hand, slowly pointing at the map, her movement deliberate and commanding. And yet no words came out of her mouth. The captain felt the room tilt, as if the air itself had shifted. The presence of experience and earned respect was suffocating in its intensity. Then it came: Sticky 6. The single word cut through the tension like a blade. He turned sharply toward the voice and saw the figure in the corner step forward, only a fraction, but enough to show authority. The word hung in the air, vibrating with significance. He realized instantly that it was more than a call sign, more than a simple identifier. It was a warning, a measure of history and skill, the kind that could not be mocked without consequence. Captain swallowed dryly, his confidence evaporating in the wake of that single utterance. His colleagues watched him with quiet intensity, waiting for his reaction. He felt the weight of every training exercise, every mission he had been on, and suddenly, they felt trivial compared to the legacy behind Sticky 6. The woman remained poised, her eyes locking onto his with a calm that suggested patience but also a limit. He knew that if he misjudged this moment, there could be repercussions beyond embarrassment. He tried to joke again, a nervous laugh escaping his lips, but it was thin and unconvincing. The room remained still, the silence pressing him further. He felt the presence of history in the walls of the room, the echoes of countless missions and exercises. Where respect was earned and not assumed, he realized that humor could not bridge this gap, only understanding and humility could. The captain looked around quickly, trying to find some ally, some friendly face, but everyone else was silent, absorbed. In the tension of the moment, the shadow in the corner had stepped slightly closer each time his eyes wandered, the movement subtle but deliberate. He felt as though invisible threads were pulling him forward, as if the room itself demanded accountability. He recognized that the casual joke he had made could have consequences that would linger in whispers among the ranks. He swallowed again, forcing his hands to steady on the table. The woman stood slowly moving toward him, her steps measured, deliberate. As if she had rehearsed this moment for years, she stopped just short of his desk, maintaining a careful distance, but her presence alone was enough to command his attention. The captain felt every muscle tense, knowing that any sudden move could make things worse. The figure in the corner stepped fully into view, revealing a uniform marked with ribbons and insignia that spoke of experience and missions that few could imagine. The captain realized suddenly that this was someone who had survived more than he had ever seen, and whose judgment could not be swayed by rank alone. The air seemed to vibrate with the unspoken lessons of the past, the victories and failures that had forged this silent authority. Sticky 6 repeated the word softly. This time, and it seemed to echo through the walls. The captain felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard of the call sign in whispers, but never in a moment like this. The woman with the new call sign nodded subtly, her eyes never leaving his. The gesture almost imperceptible, but laden with meaning. He understood that the lessons of discipline, respect, and earned authority were being conveyed without a single additional word. He wanted to apologize, but the words seemed inadequate. He could only nod slightly, his pride wounded, yet humbled. The room did not relax immediately. Every eye still watched, waiting for the captain to adjust to the lesson. He realized that humor and bravado had no place here, only acknowledgement and understanding. The tension was a living thing wrapping around him, making him acutely aware of every small sound, the shuffle of papers, the tap of a boot, the almost imperceptible exhale of someone holding back a sigh. For a long moment, nothing happened. The captain felt as though time had slowed and the room existed in a bubble of anticipation and history. He understood that this was a lesson in humility, a reminder that in the USMC legacy and earned respect were far more powerful than words he thought of. Past missions, thinking he had faced danger, but now he recognized a different kind of intensity, the one that demanded reverence and careful awareness. The woman leaned back slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table, her posture unyielding yet calm. The captain felt the weight of every story embedded in her presence. Stories he could not yet know, but felt deeply. The shadow in the corner gave a subtle nod, as if approving his recognition and understanding. The room began to breathe slowly. Again, the tension easing, but never fully leaving, lingering. Like a ghost, the captain exhaled, finally feeling the first tremor of relief. He knew that he had crossed a line, yet somehow survived it. He understood that humor must always be tempered by respect, especially in a unit forged by discipline, history, and unspoken codes. The call sign Sticky 6 was no longer just a word to him. It was a standard, a warning, and a story embedded in the fabric of every mission and every pilot who had earned. Ith straightened in his chair, swallowing the last remnants of nervous energy. The woman with the new call sign offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that he had understood. He realized that in the USMC hierarchy, courage and discipline often spoke louder than words, and that sometimes the quietest gestures carried the heaviest meaning. He looked at the map again, trying to ground himself, but the room had shifted irrevocably, the air thick with respect and history. A reminder that every joke, every comment, every misstep could carry weight far beyond intention. And still, the word Sticky 6 lingered in his mind, echoing softly like a distant drumbeat. calling him to remember and respect the lessons that could not be taught. In books only lived in action, the captain remained seated, his hands clenched on the table, his mind racing as the weight of Sticky 6 pressed down on him like a storm he had never anticipated. He felt the eyes of the room on him, every pair unyielding and sharp, and yet there was no anger, only a demand for recognition, for understanding and respect. He swallowed hard, feeling his throat tight, as if each breath reminded him of the line he had crossed. The woman with the new call sign stood just across from him, her posture flawless, as if carved from discipline itself. She spoke softly, her voice carrying the resonance of authority and history. This was not a voice raised in anger, but in measured teaching. She began to recount missions that most would never hear of, exercises conducted under fire, missions that required split second judgment and unshakable trust. She spoke of pilots who had fallen and of those who had survived against impossible odds, of the meaning behind Sticky 6. The call sign reserved for those whose skill and courage had been proven in circumstances that tested every limit. She did not glance at him while speaking, yet he felt as if each word landed directly inside his chest, as if she were measuring his respect and comprehension. The captain tried to nod, acknowledging the lesson, but the words seemed trapped inside him. He could feel the tension in the room increase, as if it were a living entity, pressing him to understand, not with ears, but with the core of his being. He remembered the casual laugh, the joke he had made, and shuddered, feeling the immensity of the misstep. He realized that humor here was not a bridge, but a boundary, and that he had stepped across it unawarely. Shadow in the corner remained motionless, his presence like a pillar of history, silent and unwavering, but his eyes held a sharpness that seemed to penetrate every layer of the captain's composure. The room itself seemed to contract, the walls closing in slightly, and the fluorescent lights above cast harsh reflections across the table, making every small movement exaggerated and full of meaning. He could sense the stories that had shaped this unit, the sacrifices, the silent endurance, the victories and losses that never made it. 2 reports only lived in memory and whispered in moments like this. A woman stepped closer, her pace deliberate and her gaze never leaving his. He could feel the almost imperceptible shift of authority, the subtle pressure of someone whose experience dwarfed his own. He realized that Sticky 6 was not merely a call sign, it was a standard, a measure of honor and skill that demanded reverence. He tried to speak an apology rising to his lips, but her hand lifted slightly and he stopped mid-breath, understanding that words were not yet appropriate. She began recounting a mission in the mountains where a small squad had been trapped by unexpected enemy fire, communication cut off and extraction impossible. They had moved with precision and courage, relying only on training instincts and each other. They had lost friends, but survived through sheer discipline and unflinching trust in their team. The story carried weight in the air, the silence of the room amplifying each detail, and the captain felt as if he were living it himself. Each twist, each decision, each moment of fear and clarity embedding itself into his consciousness. The room seemed to shrink further as she continued the story. Her voice steady and unwavering, she described the split-second calls, the unspoken coordination, the sacrifices made, and the unwavering commitment to the mission and each other. Her words painted pictures that he could not unsee and left impressions that he could not ignore. The shadow in the corner nodded subtly, confirming the authenticity of every word. The captain felt a deep pull in his chest, a mix of awe, fear, and recognition. The captain's mind reeled. He had led men into danger. He had faced storms, bullets, and fire, but none of that had prepared him for the intensity of respect demanded in this room, for the weight of a legacy carried silently and without compromise. He thought of every careless joke, every word spoken lightly, and felt a shiver of realization that some humor could never bridge the divide between ignorance and earned honor. Woman paused briefly, her gaze finally meeting his directly. He felt the full force of understanding in that look the history of Sticky Six, the lives and missions behind the name, the quiet but undeniable authority of those who had earned it. She nodded slightly, signaling the completion of the lesson, and yet the room remained charged with expectation, as if the acknowledgement itself had to be absorbed fully. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard, feeling a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Knowing that this moment would not fade easily from memory, he looked around the room. The other pilots now relaxed slightly, but still watchful. He realized that he had been tested in a way he had never encountered before. The evaluation had not been of skill or courage in the field, but of humility, respect, and understanding of legacy. He felt a strange sense of reverence, the kind that came from recognizing a standard far above one's own achievements and the necessity of honoring it. The woman stepped back a fraction, her posture relaxing just enough to signal closure, yet still carrying the aura of discipline and strength. He noticed small movements around the room, subtle shifts of acknowledgement. The colleagues who had remained silent now, offering brief nods confirming his recognition. The captain felt a weight lift, but the shadow of responsibility lingered, a constant reminder that every action hereafter would be measured not only in skill, but in adherence to the principles and history behind Sticky Six. He thought of the missions ahead, the exercises, the flights, and the small moments that could define respect within the unit. He realized that one careless word could unravel trust built over decades, and that recognition of the past was as important as performance in the present. The room seemed to exhale with him, the tension easing, yet leaving an invisible imprint on every surface, and every consciousness within it. The captain's gaze returned to the map, still spread on the table, lines and markers. No longer mere coordinates, but symbols of the responsibility he carried. He reached for his pen, hesitated, feeling the weight of what he was about to do, and then made the notes carefully, deliberate, aware that each movement mattered not only in planning missions, but in upholding the honor and trust demanded by the unit. The woman finally spoke softly, reminding him of the importance of preparation, observation, and integrity. Every mission a measure not just of skill, but of character. The captain listened intently, committing every word to memory, understanding that the lesson was not simply a story, but a framework for action and respect in every moment. The room was quiet now, every movement deliberate, every glance significant, the history of the unit woven into the atmosphere. The shadow in the corner finally stepped back to his original place, his presence still commanding yet unobtrusive, signaling that the evaluation had been noted and that the captain had survived both the test and the warning. The air remained thick with respect, a tangible reminder of what Sticky Six represented and the unseen weight carried by those who had earned the right to use it. The captain exhaled slowly, his pride tempered by understanding. He felt a profound shift inside himself, mixture of relief and humility, recognition and awe. He knew that the lesson would follow him into every briefing, every mission, and every suit, and every interaction with his colleagues. He realized that humor could be a bridge in many places, but never here where history and honor demanded vigilance and reverence. He rose finally from the chair, feeling taller yet more grounded than ever before, aware that acknowledgement was only the first step. The true challenge was living in accordance with the respect and discipline imparted to him. The woman nodded once more, signaling closure. The room slowly returning to routine, but the presence of the lesson lingering like an echo in the walls and in the minds of everyone present. The captain left the briefing room later that day, his steps measured and deliberate, each movement carrying the weight of understanding he could not yet articulate fully, yet felt deeply. The call sign Sticky Six reverberated in his mind, a constant reminder of the legacy he had been introduced to and the standard he must uphold. The room remained silent behind him, but the lessons endured in every corner, in every shadow, in the quiet authority that demanded recognition without words. And as he walked down the corridor, He felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest, understanding at last that courage was not measured only in action or rank, but in humility, discipline, and respect for those who had earned the right to set the standard for all who followed.